Welcome to the University Supervisor Orientation for secondary, pre-K-12, and middle school programs at the University of Maryland, College Park. Go Terps! We're excited to have you as part of our teacher education program and part of our team working with our pre-service teachers. This presentation is going to cover both background information about our programs and, more importantly, focus on the role and expectations of the supervisor. We hope that you'll find it informative. When you hear other voices that are not mine, those are current interns, former interns, and in one case a mentor teacher sharing their perspective on the topics that we're discussing. We hope that you'll find this presentation helpful. On each slide, please click on the speaker, unless you're watching this in movie format, in which case just continue along. Please have your supervisor handbook on hand. There'll be various places where we'll ask you to reference particular page numbers. The first segment, we're going to basically sort of walk you through a lot of that information. So at various points, you'll need to pause to give yourself time to hop over and look at that handbook. Again, we hope you find this helpful, and we're looking forward to a good session. Thank you. Before we dive into anything else, we always like to start with taking a moment to think about the goals for the internship itself, because it's such an enormously important part of the intern's learning experience as part of their pre-service teacher education program. So we want to ask you to take a moment to look on page 2 of your handbook. There is a detailed explanation of the goals of the internship. So we would like to ask you to take a moment to read through those goals and identify for yourself which goal or goals do you think is most important and which goal or goals do you think is most challenging for teaching interns. So you can pause me here, and then after you have a chance to take a moment to look through that, then you can move on. Thanks. Next is who's who. The core team is the intern, the mentor, and the supervisor. Historically, the intern was called the student teacher. The current lingo for that in Maryland is the intern or the teaching intern. They'll also sometimes be called the teacher candidate. The mentor, who again historically was called the cooperating teacher, but now is referred to as the mentor or the mentor teacher. That's the person whose classroom that all the action will be happening in. And then obviously the supervisor is you. There are other sort of key players hanging out here on the outside. The PDS site liaison is the faculty member within each partner school who is designated to be sort of the point person for that partner school. It will vary by school whether you will interact with that person really at all. The main person you are definitely going to be interacting with is your PDS coordinator based here in College Park, and those are specific to each certification area. So you've got your certification area person who's going to be working closely with you and all of the interns and all of the mentors. There's more details on each of those roles. Also the explanation of what PDS stands for, which is Professional Development School. Effectively, it's basically one of our official partner schools. All that additional background is on page 3 if you want to take a sec to look at that. And then when you're ready, you can move on. We want to take a minute to give you a sense of how we approach the internship and the progression of the intern's experience over the course of the year. We are not a sink or swim approach. We're definitely feel very strongly that our long-term goal is to help the interns develop really good habits that they will then be able to take with them into their first year of teaching, and that the way to do that is to gradually increase their responsibility and to have support and feedback throughout. So you'll see we talk about it in terms of stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. There's a full explanation in the handbook on pages 4 through 6 that really dives into what each of those stages should look like. But as you can see from the graphic, the basic idea is that in stage 1, the mentor is in the lead and the intern is in the support role. In stage 2, we're really looking at a lot of co-teaching, co-planning, co-assessing. Stage 3, the intern moves into the lead. And then in stage 4, the intern phases out and then uses that time to really shore up their ideas and preparations and everything for springboarding into their first year of teaching. Again, please stop and take a moment to look at pages 4 through 6 to get a better sense of what those 4 stages are supposed to look like. You will also find in here an explanation of how the timing of those 4 stages is generally expected to play out within the undergraduate program versus the MCert program. So depending on which set of teaching interns you're working with, that would impact which time frame that you're looking at. When you're done with getting a good sense of the 4 stages, move on to the next slide. Next, we want to take a few minutes to look at the key assessments that are used to evaluate and monitor all of our interns. You will be heavily involved in a couple of these. But just as an overarching frame, we try to think about our assessments in terms of looking back at those internship goals. So we identified those at the beginning of our presentation, and now we're going to look at our assessments in terms of how we're measuring their progress in all these goals. So go ahead and hop to the next slide. The first assessment we're going to talk about is a college-wide assessment that all of our interns are required to be evaluated on at intervals throughout the year. It's referred to as the foundational competencies. It focuses on different aspects of being a professional. You'll see there are 5 categories within the larger framework of the foundational competencies, and then within each of those categories there will be a range of specific items focusing in on particular attitudes, dispositions, habits, skills, mindsets associated with being a strong professional in our field. The second key assessment that you will also be evaluating the intern on at quarterly intervals, along with the foundational competencies, is the performance-based assessment, usually referred to as the PBA. You can see over on the left, the idea of the PBA is that it's really getting at all of the goals for the internship. So it will include planning, facilitating, assessing student learning, creating an effective learning environment, using educational technology, maintaining strong professionalism, and then also reflective teaching, thinking about their own teaching, their students' learning, and being reflective about how they can continue to improve. The actual categories will vary based on certification. There's an example for you over in the right-hand portion of this slide, that some of the certification areas use this set of categories, but it varies again by certification area what the categories will be and what the specific prompts will be within each category. But this gives you a sense of the range of things that the performance-based assessment is looking at. At each interval, the intern self-assesses and the mentor and supervisor evaluate the intern on the PBA. The next major assessment for your interns is called the EdTPA. It's like a pre-service version of national boards. You will not be evaluating your intern on their EdTPA, but it will be significant in their lives, and therefore I'm sure you'll hear a lot about it. They have to plan, implement the instruction for, and then assess student learning for a 3 to 5 hour learning segment, for which they have to do extensive commentary, reflection, evaluation, analysis of student work and student performance. It is a very time-consuming process for the interns, but one that we hope they find very valuable in their thinking about their roles as a teacher. And if you are interested in becoming an evaluator for EdTPA, you would not be assigned to your own teaching intern, but there are opportunities to serve as an evaluator. Let your PDS coordinator know if you're interested. And then finally, before we dive into your role, we wanted to ask you to pause and take a few minutes to look through the relevant pages in the handbook to get up to speed on the policies that impact your intern that are specific to their role in the internship. So if you can pause here, take a few minutes to look through these policies in the handbook, and then when you're ready, unpause, and we will dive into your role. All right, so now we're ready to dive into the best job in the program. Hooray! All right, supervising. So on pages 11 through 14, there's an extended remix for each of those 5 key players, describing in more detail what the responsibilities are. So please take a moment to focus in on the list for the supervisor. And then when you go to the next slide, we're going to get some insight from folks out in the field, from some interns sharing their perspective on what the role of the supervisor is all about.
So I think the role of a supervisor is to be just the foundational support for me as an intern. My supervisor has been very helpful in making sure that I have all the accommodations, that I'm comfortable in my teaching environment, and whenever I have questions or feel like I'm struggling, they're always there to provide feedback and provide strategies that I can use in order to make my internship better and also make my teaching skills better as well.
As an intern, it was helpful. And I would get feedback about um, some of the things that I had done in my internship from somebody other than my mentor because he spent so much time with me. It's nice to hear it from an outside perspective.
So I think the best role of a supervisor is mainly to be a support function. So when I first met my supervisor, she told me that she actually did not like the word supervisor. She preferred to use the word coach. And I think that aspect of being a supervisor is probably what's most helpful to interns.
So we cannot emphasize enough how enormously important you are to the interns and to the program. You are such an integral part of ensuring that the internship placement works for the intern and ensuring that they are learning what we want them to be learning from those experiences that they're having out there. So this slide is intended to sort of capture the main elements that you're responsible for. Over on the left, that is representing that you are the communication hub between the mentor, the intern, and the PDS coordinator. So the mentor will be coming to you to share how they feel like the experience, the placement is going. The intern will be coming to you to share how they feel like the placement experience is going. And then we need you to come to the PDS coordinator with how you feel the placement experience is going, and then the placement coordinator is conveying through you the expectations of the program that need to in turn be conveyed regularly and maintained out there in the field with the mentor and the intern. So you are essential as this communication hub over there in the yellow section of our slide. And then in terms of the actual meetings that you're going to have, is over there in the red section of the, or shades of red section of the slide. So we'll dive into the details of this, but the basic gist is that for each of your interns, you'll have an initial meeting at the beginning of the placement, and then within each semester of the placement, so that depends on whether you're working with an MCert or an undergrad intern, but within each semester of the placement, you'll do 2 observation cycles and then a midpoint evaluation and a midpoint conference. And then you'll do another 2 observation cycles and a final evaluation and a final conference. And we're going to dive into the details of those next. So we're starting with the initial triad meeting. These are essential to getting the placement off on the right foot. If you're working with undergraduates, then you're going to be doing these in the first part of January. And if you are working with MCerts, then you are doing it at the beginning of the placement. And depending on which program you're working with or which certification area you're working with, there may be more than one placement. So you'll be having more than one initial triad meeting at the beginning of each placement. In terms of the meeting itself, there's some details on page 14 that dive into some of the things you want to make sure that you do during that initial meeting. But the basic gist is that you really want to get a strong conversation going where you establish expectations, the program expectations, and also each of the 3 of you's expectations for how you want this relationship to work effectively and the placement to work effectively, and to talk about goals. What are the intern's goals for their development, and what are the mentor's goals for their work with the intern. And then obviously also your goals for what you want to see for a successful working relationship among the 3 of you and a successful placement for the intern.
I found the initial meeting especially helpful because I'm kind of afraid of my mentor. And so it was nice to just have like a third person there to just kind of bring up those topics that might seem awkward at first.
The biggest thing that the supervisors do is be kind of the intermediary between the mentor and the intern.
I find this particularly helpful because it gives the mentee a chance to put forward their thoughts, concerns, worries, their expectations, and see if they're aligned with what the mentor has. I think this is key to the mentor-mentee relationship because having everything out in the open, up front in the beginning, sets a precedent for where the relationship will go, what the expectations will be, and how fast they want them to proceed.
An important part of that initial triad meeting that then you will revisit throughout your work with the intern will be transition planning. And so the mentor, intern, and supervisor work together to do that sort of initial layout of how the intern will be progressing between the stages with an eye toward their specific pathway, whether they're an undergraduate, and I'm certain that impacts the number of courses they should be working with. And then also you'll need to communicate with your PDS coordinator because there may be particular things about a placement. The mentor may teach some courses that the intern should not be assumingly teaching for. It may well be that the intern, you might not want to have the intern working with multiple preps, or you're really going to want to think about the intern's strengths and weaknesses and how maybe if they are going to have different preps or working with different student populations even within the same prep, maybe they will offset how they transition from one stage to the other with different classes. So all of that is going to be really strategic, and especially with an eye towards that larger goal of helping them develop strong habits that they'll be able to take in the future. So we want the transition plan to really support that gradual increase and really development of strong habits. There's some page numbers referenced there for you where you can see, again, the pathway design, but also we've got some sample transition plans for you to give you an idea of what that initial transition planning might look like. Okay, so we've covered the initial triad meeting, and next we're going to talk about observation cycles. Again, you're going to do at least 2 before the midpoint evaluation conference within a semester, and then at least 2 more between that midpoint and the final evaluation conference at the end of the semester. And so we're going to take a moment to talk about what do each of those 4 observation cycles look like. We have some resource pages for you in the handbook to look at in terms of the observation cycle. We're going to talk through it a little bit more in the next couple of slides as well. But before we dive in and to sort of give you a frame as you're looking at those resource pages in the handbook, the goal of the observation cycles is to prepare the interns so that next year when they don't have you there giving them lots of great feedback and they don't have their mentor teacher in the classroom with them regularly, that they will be able to see what's happening in their classroom, stop and think about what is going well, what they could be doing differently, and be able to generate ideas about how to improve. If they can't do that as a first, second, third year teacher, then they're going to give up on the profession. So our goal in these observation cycles is really to hold up a mirror to them to help them do that thinking. And then to guide them in doing that thinking and to do some modeling for them about that thinking, but that we're really trying to prepare them so that they'll be able to do this type of seeing their own classroom and reflecting and improving on their own as they move into the first few years of their career. So the observation cycle should start with the intern sending you their lesson plan in advance so that you have a chance to look over it. Ideally, what we hope will be happening, especially as the year goes on, that the intern will be identifying for you what specific things they are hoping you will focus on. I'm trying to work on improving my think time, or I'm really worried about the transitions from this activity to this activity, or I know that I've been losing the students and I'd like you to help me figure out where it is that they're getting lost or where it is that I'm losing their attention. Whatever it is that may be the particular aspect of teaching that the intern needs to improve on, that they'll identify that for you and say, hey, can you help me by observing especially for this? And then you'll have the observation itself is step 2. During that observation, you could be doing sort of script style notes or another note-taking format. You could use an observation tool that has a particular focus that matches up with whatever aspect of teaching ideally that the intern wants to work on, or perhaps one that you and the mentor have identified that you think the intern really needs to hone in on. It could be some combination of those. You'll do partly script notes, partly observation tool, etc. So you do your observation and use some strategic note-taking. Step 3 of the observation cycle is going to be that post-observation conference where you sit down and you debrief. You're going to talk it through with the intern. We always want to start with the intern's reflection. In the handbook, you'll see there's a tool in there that you can use that has the intern do some initial writing of their reflection. What do they think went well? What's their evidence for that? What do they think didn't go as well, or that were areas for improvement, and what's their evidence for that? You can use one of those written tools to help the intern get the juices flowing, or just open with questions asking the intern to share their reflection and insights about the lesson. And then you switch into you share, and you've got some observation data perhaps from one of those tools, from the styled notes that you were doing, some specific praise and some constructive criticism. We have a little picture of a sandwich there. We'd like to think about giving feedback in terms of a feedback sandwich. The bread you can think of as the praise, and then all the stuff in the middle is the various things that they could be improving on, so that you're opening with something strong that they did, so that they know that you value them and think they're doing a good job, and they don't sort of just kind of shut down when they start going straight into the criticism. And you also always want to end feedback with additional positives, so that they know that they can, go out there and get it done, and they leave feeling good about their future and their development as they're moving forward. Ideally, as part of that conference as well, you're jointly generating some strategies that they're going to try, maybe establishing some goals for what they're going to work on. And then the final stage, step 4 of the observation cycle, will be when you send written feedback to the intern. Generally, it varies by certification area what that process will look like, but generally the written feedback will go to the intern and the PDS coordinator, and there may be particular forms that your certification area will use for that written feedback at the end of each observation cycle. A couple of additional resources in the handbook related to that, to step 2 of the observation cycle, to the actual observation and the way that you'll take your notes. There's a range of ideas of possible strategies you could use for note-taking, and sort of informal tools that you can kind of create as you go to meet the needs of a particular observation. And then there's also in the handbook a sample of a specific observation tool with a particular focus. And your PDS coordinators have lots of additional tools if you are interested in getting a fuller range of observation tools that focus on different aspects of teaching. We mentioned in connection with the post-observation conference that there's a tool in the handbook for you that you can use as a note sheet to get the intern to start getting their thinking going, their reflection going before you start debriefing with them. So this is just a quick slide to show you that tool that you have in your handbook.
It gives the intern a chance to practice reflective teaching and really hone in on what they felt was strong and what they need to fix.
I get to sit down with the supervisor, and before she even talks to me, I get to fill out like what I think went well, what I think I could have changed. Then I get to tell her about it, which I really like, because then she doesn't think that I'm really stupid, because at least I know what I did wrong most of the time. And then he or she can give me advice about how I could further do that, especially since they're experienced and they haven't only taught something for a month, like to have an action plan afterwards as opposed to just having feedback and then kind of not necessarily embedding that into what you're actually doing next. And also I like that my supervisor mentions those 3 goals I have and asks me whether I feel like I've been doing better at them or not. And so it's nice to see that they're not just like in vain, that they really are like, no, these goals are something we're actually going to think about and we're going to work on. My supervisor gives a great job of written feedback, mostly because the feedback that he gives puts me in a spot to reflect on what I did and what I can improve. And I think that really distinguishes what he sees as a good teacher versus what he sees as a great teacher. So it gives me a goal to achieve and really makes me light the fire and strive for that.
We've got the initial meetings and observation cycles under our belt. Now we're just going to spend a couple of slides making sure that folks feel ready to tackle midpoint and final evaluations and the evaluation conferences that go with each of those 2 rounds of evaluation. You'll get the exact dates from your PDS coordinator, but here's a quick slide to give you the basic timeframes for the midpoint and final evaluations for each semester. So you'll be completing the PBA, also known as the performance-based assessment, at the midpoint and final evaluation for the semester. You will likely be doing the foundational competency at both of those intervals. It varies slightly within certification area. All of your major evaluations, midpoint and final evaluations, you'll complete in an online platform called LiveText, www.livetext.com. You'll get an email from LiveText with your username and password. If you lose track of that, you can go onto livetext.com, you hover over the word login in that line where it says visitor pass login /register. If you hover over login, this little box will pop up that includes forgot password, and you can just click on forgot password, enter the email address that the university uses for you, and you can get your login credentials. This is the first half of a just quick PDF document. It's a tutorial for how to get into LiveText and find the place where you submit your, well, where will you complete and then ultimately submit your PBA and foundational competency evaluations. Again, you can get the PDF document from your PDS coordinator, or this is here for your reference. Here's the second half of that tutorial. I also wanted to point out to you, when you go in and complete your PBA for each section, so for example, for the planning section, the last 3 items within a section are consistent across all the different sections, and so there will be one row that says something along the lines of areas of strength. You do not need to rate anything. You could hit NA, but you're expected to put in comments and include comments on that particular row of strengths within the category. For example, if it's the category of planning, so then there'll be a row that's areas of strength, and so you'll put comments related to strengths in planning, and then there's a row that will say areas for improvement or areas of weakness or something to that effect, and then you'll put in comments there with specific areas that they need to focus on improving. Again, you can either give it a rating that will just sort of represent an overall rating for planning, or you can just mark NA for that row. And then the last row in each section will specifically ask you for an overall rating for that section. So we do want you to give an overall what you feel like they deserve within that category of the PBA. When you're completing the PBA evaluation, you'll have a rating scale. There's one sample that a few of the certification areas will be using up here. It will vary by certification area which rating scale you are using. So this is just an example. Regardless of which scale you're using, you should rate in relation to where you think the intern should be by the end of the school year. So if they're, in October, they're doing great for early, but still, just fine compared to where you expect them at the end of the school year, then your rating should be in relation to where you expect them at the end of the school year. So it would be fine. And then, ideally, they've gotten better and better and better, such that in May, you're saying that they're outstanding. If you're using a rating scale that includes the option needs improvement, we want to offer the caveat, obviously, teachers always need improvement. That item on the rating scale, for those of you with this rating scale with needs improvement, should only be used to signal that it's an area of concern. You can assume that all of the others are, satisfactory, with room for improvement, very good, with room for improvement, outstanding, with room for even more improvement. But that needs improvement rating should be reserved to signal that it's an area of concern. So for each of the conferences, of the evaluation conferences that you'll have as the triad, the mentor, supervisor, and intern, you'll have basically 2 major parts. One, you're going to discuss the evaluations that were completed, the PBA and foundational competency evaluations, again, with an eye towards making sure that you're including feedback sandwiches, that you're incorporating praise and areas for improvement, and also that you're identifying discrepancies between different raters. So if, of the trio, one person is rating significantly higher or significantly lower on particular items, it would be worth talking that through and getting a sense for people's different perceptions. And then the second part of the conference we'll be planning for next steps. So at the midpoint, all of the conferences prior to the end of the year, you'll be looking again at the transition plan. You'll be talking about what will be useful things to do in developing their skills as they move forward into the next phase. There's a page in the handbook when you get to to looking at stage 4 and how they can make the best use of stage 4. There's a page in the appendix of the handbook with ideas for the types of things that they can be doing during stage 4. And then for the final conference, the planning for next steps is planning for their first year as a teacher. So looking ahead to how they can really springboard into having a great, successful start to their school year, and any ideas that the mentor and supervisor can be sharing about how to really get off to a good start would be enormously helpful to the interns.
What's most beneficial for me is being able to compare notes. I actually look forward to see if the supervisor is picking up on the same things that I am, and what I'm missing. That can kind of, it lends me to look for other things when I'm observing.
So my supervisor really makes it a point to get to know myself and my mentor. So when we come together for the evaluation conferences, it's a collaborative effort. And he always takes the information from my mentor and myself and always applies it in a constructive way.
One of the things that's the most effective and helpful about evaluation conferences is just making sure that everyone's on the same page between intern, mentor, teacher, and supervisor. So that way everyone knows what the intern needs to work on, everyone knows what the intern is doing well on, and just so that everyone has had a chance to raise their concerns, their feedback, and anything else that they want to talk about.
I find it particularly helpful the end of the year conference, just because it was nice to, after having spent a year working with somebody and then kind of taking things on my own, and even though getting that feedback periodically throughout the semester and throughout the year, it was really nice to kind of see somebody else's perspective from where I had started and kind of the process I had gone through, and then really kind of wrap things up at the end to say, like, some next steps moving forward might be helpful, and to just kind of wrap up what I had done for the year, to kind of see where I had gone and make it. By the end of the year, you're pretty exhausted, and it's nice to hear that you've actually made some progress out of the year.
Hopefully now you have a good sense of the major responsibilities associated with each of the interns that you work with in terms of your role as a communication hub, and then in terms of each of the meetings, observation cycles, and conferences and evaluations that you'll be doing with each of your interns. And then we've got a list here to give you a sense of some of the other additional responsibilities. The first bullet, engage with the intervention policy and monitor action plans as needed. Hopefully none of your interns will need this sort of intervention, but if they do, then you're expected to be part of the team working with the PDS coordinator and the mentor and the intern, obviously, to help put supports in place to either get them turned around and enable them to be successful, or potentially help identify that this is not the right profession for them. So that will be on an as-needed case-by-case basis. More generally, for all of your interns who are having successful years in completing the program, you'll be expected to potentially write letters of recommendation for them and or serve as a professional reference as they make those requests of you. You are asked at the end of each program year to provide feedback on each of the mentors that you have worked with and on the PDS coordinator that you've worked with to help us improve our programs and our personnel and our staffing each year. And then finally, there are intern orientations that we would love for you to come and be a part of. There are some that are program-wide, some that are done on certification area basis, and there may be other certification area initiatives, events, or planning that is always helpful to have supervisors involved in those program efforts.
They serve as a port in the storm, per se, because things can get hectic, and they are somebody that you can rely on to get immediate feedback from, immediate emails from, go to with problems. If it is with a mentor or with a school situation or assignment or just any particular dilemmas that you're having, they just serve as a confidant and almost as a second mentor.
And what's nice is also they're just kind of a connection that you can have for when you have questions about your own teaching or their teaching style, or have them as a liaison between you and your mentor if anything is difficult there. And so it's nice that they come in person, but it's also nice that I feel I can email my supervisor whenever necessary.
And as long as the intern knows that that supervisor is there, that supervisor is there to help them become a better teacher. I think that's
That is all that we have for you in this session. We hope your handbook will be a useful resource to you. If you have questions, please bring them with you to our in-person supervisor session and or contact your PDS coordinator. They are there as a resource for you throughout the year. And we look forward to working with you, and we hope you enjoy this phenomenal, exciting, wonderful, and important job of being a supervisor. Thanks so much for being part of the team.